Good morning,
Morning.
everybody. Well, it's actually afternoon to you, but it's very much a good morning from me here in the UK. I will soon share my screen, if that's okay.
Yes, we're excited. Awesome.
Okay, I'm
Very
hoping
cool.
very much that you can see my screen. I'm going to go into full screen mode.
Thank you very much.
So yes, good morning, and I'm so sorry that I can't be with you this year, as normally I would be with you in Thailand to come and see my very enjoyable visits to Thailand. And so my greetings to all of you as colleagues from Silpakorn University International College, from all my colleagues here at Birmingham City University, and my very best wishes to Dr. Sompit. And so sorry that I won't be seeing you in person this year. So thank you so much for inviting me to present at the international conference this year. As we know, this has been an unprecedented year, particularly for those of us delivering higher education to our students, but particularly within the areas of practice-based art and design, those creative subjects. It has been a challenge. And with a faculty, as I have, with just under 5,500 students and 400 staff, with subjects ranging from architecture through to our Royal Birmingham Conservatoire, music, performance, practice-based studio education, we have certainly been challenged with innovation, but as creatives, we have risen, as I know Silpakorn has as well, and we have continued to deliver a really exciting higher education programs in art and design. So today I'd like to talk about creativity as a catalyst for post-COVID recovery. And I think this is really about putting at this point of the pandemic, that aspect of hope, where we are seeing the role of creativity in that bounce back, that recovery mode post-COVID. And of course, around the globe, we're all at different stages of managing the pandemic. And with the announcement of the vaccination, which is now started to roll out in the UK, and indeed, we have our first vaccination centre set up at Birmingham City University, there is good reason for hope. So I'm going to carry on into my slides. So first of all, I'd like to talk about three stages: creativity pre-COVID, pre the pandemic. I'd like to talk about it during the pandemic, during COVID, but I'd also like to talk about it in terms of post-recovery. And I think it's really important to think about the value of the creative industries. And I'm painting a picture here around the UK creative industries, because this is obviously an important area of growth for the UK. So its value in terms of industries is around 111 billion. We've seen that grow year on year, and it's now generating 12.7 million pounds an hour. So every hour, this is the income that it is generating. This is the net worth that it brings to the UK's economy. And we know that it's growing 5 times faster in terms of its annual growth than any other UK industry. So this is an important aspect to the UK, particularly at this time. So this is what we had in terms of its value pre-COVID. It has obviously been a very challenging time in the UK, as it has around the globe, particularly to those areas of museums, art galleries, our theatres, and our performances, which has been a huge challenge to be able to continue with those public face-to-face mass events. So if we break down some of those UK creative industries, we start to see where that growth is. And this is really starting to help define some of those growth areas for our curriculum. So if we have a look at this slide, we'll see that in terms of the largest growth area, we see around 45 billion pounds there in terms of IT software and games. And what we've seen during the pandemic is the emergence of what we're now calling, certainly in the UK, and is emerging around the globe, as create tech. And as you may know, we have STEAM and we have STEAM House at Birmingham City University, which are STEM subjects with the arts. But now we're starting to see this emerging area of create tech. And what's really interesting in terms of what brings those subjects together in this significant growth area of IT software and games is actually the use of immersive technology. So we're seeing in the UK the use of VR, AR, user experience, UX, and AI. And we're starting to see that not just within IT software and games, but we're starting to see that almost as a new media, similar to using a paintbrush or a pencil across areas of fashion design, fashion retail, retail experiences. We're seeing it in theatre design, in virtual set design. I'm currently working with Stephen Knight, the Hollywood and international director of Peaky Blinders. It's a series which has taken certainly the UK and the US by storm. And he's in fact building new studios, new film studios in the Digbeth area in Birmingham, just opposite the university, and very much connected to London with a new high-speed railway network straight from London to Birmingham, which is only about 45 to 50 minutes. So that big emerging area of using VR is happening across all of our areas, including fine art installation. So then we look at the other areas of growth, which is around film and TV. And what we've seen during the pandemic and coming up to the pandemic was this huge demand of content creation. So with a generation of, I would say, young Generation X coming through, where they are very much used to digesting content in the order and when they want to when they actually want to just consume that content. We're also seeing that in popular culture. So the ability to just binge on a Netflix series. And what's really come out of the pandemic is that there has been less on-site shooting. And in terms of camera crews, they have shrunk. They have had to work within COVID safe measures. And actually the filming and creating of film and TV content almost came to a halt. But studio use and use of green screen, and we have one of the largest green screens in Birmingham, at Birmingham City University in Europe. We have been constantly booked out by film companies, the BBC, where they're needing to make immersive content as quickly as they possibly can. And so then we also see publishing coming through and e-publishing, as well as the return of actually book design. And then creative advertising is another booming area. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in my next set of slides. I think it's also worth mentioning here, though, the music, arts and culture, and how actually VR and immersive experiences have been adapted and used to flip out and make available those museum collections that otherwise would remain closed. So we know that the creative industries are booming, they're fast growing, they're high exporting, and they're attracting investment in the UK. I've already identified that they're growing 5 times faster than any other industries, but they also create exports worth around 32, almost 33 billion pounds worth. But it's also been attracting investment. So it's no surprise that we are looking at a huge emergence of new studios being built in the UK for film and TV. And it's attractive only at just over 2 billion pounds of inward investment just last year. And in fact, we're being approached all the time by those kinds of investment companies working with studio builders and studio experts to create these new spaces in the UK. But it's also being seen as an opportunity to help scale up small and medium enterprises in the UK and to enable entrepreneurs to grow within this particular sector. So it's seen as a real catalyst to economic recovery within the UK. And it's definitely been seen in terms of the creative industries at being at the heart of the UK's competitive advantage. And of course, as you'll know, and you will be following this, I'm sure around the globe, as we exit the European Union, which for many of us is very problematic. And as you will have picked up, quite a very divided position within the UK. But we do see the creative industries having a critical role to play as we exit that European Union to create a more global Britain in a state of a post-COVID recovery. So let's talk a little bit about creativity during COVID and during lockdown. So we see that out of constraint, isolation and boredom comes creativity. And we saw this happening around the world. We saw during lockdown many people turning to arts and crafts and making to help manage those slightly cooped up, locked in behaviours, to help them process their feelings of losing those freedoms and abilities to do what they would have normally done within their lives. We also saw it being adopted to reduce stress and anxiety in our young people, how to connect communities. We saw the emergence of online teaching. We saw community groups creating art lessons. We had virtual choirs. We had numerous things like plays online. And I myself were watching theatre companies during lockdown and having those as virtual performances. And we know that this draws on the sense of art therapy, which uses approaches which help to explore self-discovery. So creating art, we know, can acknowledge and recognize those feelings that have been sort of there within your subconscious. And art therapy is used to help individuals and human beings move through some of those inward feelings. It's also used to unlock a self-esteem. So we see art therapy used as a way of feeling self-accomplishment. And I myself have worked on young people's exclusion programs where young people have struggled to engage with education, where creative subjects actually unlock that sense that they have an ability, that they have talent, that they have value. And this has been a really important way of re-engaging them with education. And this can help the kind of self-appreciation, self-efficacy, and that confidence level in feeling good at something. And that's so important for young people as part of their education. But it also provides that freedom of kind of learning through failure or learning through creativity and play, which isn't always conducive to a 2 + 2 = 4 outcome. In other words, it is a very different discipline which has multiple outcomes and allows individuals to understand that it's about a journey and it's not always about having a positive, definitive outcome, but has many different permutations. It's also seen as having the opportunity for emotional release. We know that the greatest benefit of art therapy is to give you a healthy outlet for expressing and letting go of fears and feelings. And we've seen very much individuals that have never painted or drawn or created at home ever before, doing that on a regular basis and continuing to do that. And we have a world-renowned artist, Grayson Perry, who has been televising a really extraordinary documentary programme really about individuals around the UK making work at home. And he's created a really amazing exhibition of the unknown artists that have just created work behind their closed doors. And this will become an incredible sort of set of artifacts, I think, from members of the public who engaged in this creative activity. And then, of course, there's that sort of stress relief, that releasing of anxiety and depression and trauma that can be very stressful. And of course, the pandemic has provided or kind of given us those huge kind of humanity challenges. So this has been a really important part of creating some of those feel-good dopamine outputs of our bodies to make us feel that little bit happier. So we saw creativity during COVID happening all around the world. We saw defiance in the face of the pandemic to continue to provide creativity. We saw Italian musicians on balconies playing their musical instruments, giving to the communities that they live in. Enabling their creativity and making of music still to touch the hearts of all of those members of public and communities that they live in. And there was nothing more heartening and more uplifting than to see this during such hardship and times of being isolated. We've seen, despite the high risks of actually performance being seen as one of the most challenging areas in terms of risk assessments, we've seen choirs be able to adopt new approaches. Our own students in the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire are managing to perform in safe, distanced arrangements. We have transparent screens between them as performers. We've gone to great lengths to make sure that they can still perform within their spaces. And of course, what's been really interesting is the use of technology, where they've been able to be working in their own bedrooms and in their own houses and at their kitchen tables, performing, playing their instruments, and then managing to edit and to compose using some technologies and some platforms to continue to perform as a group. So that idea of group performance was still able to continue. And we've also seen composers and musicians around the world find innovative ways of still holding public performances, such as you see here, using a swimming pool as an appropriation of a new conference hall. And so again, creativity defies that sense of isolation or not being able to be together. And then we've also seen an emergence of new art forms. I've always been incredibly involved and incredibly interested in urban art forms, having been involved in 2008 in the new kind of the emergence of urban art in the UK. I was very much working with urban artists within cities of London, Bristol, Brighton. And here we saw the emergence of Banksy, and I have worked with him myself and other really emerging, interesting urban artists. And I was also part of the first urban art auction at Bonham's auction house, fine art auction house in the UK. And what's been extraordinary is this kind of incredible emergence of, and that kind of sense of needing to portray the feelings of the nation. And we've seen that all around the world. And urban artists are so brilliant at capturing those kind of socio-political images. And they've been doing this in all kinds of spaces around the city. And these are really powerful, I think very capturing images by these urban artists. And here we see a whole set of, I think, a new set of art history forming in front of our very eyes, of artifacts to be retained for the future, which will so much like many other periods of art history and that contextual study that we will be providing to our students in the future. I can see that this art in the age of a pandemic will become very much a new form and a new form of representation, which we will see being part of our presentations and lectures in art history as we go forward into the next centuries. And this is one of our very own graduates actually producing work. We have a huge active scene of urban art in Birmingham City. And we see these kind of emerging all around the areas, particularly of Digbeth, just opposite the university. And these have become these kind of huge murals, which are also celebrating the diversity of the city, but these kind of animated pictorial representations of how everybody has, in a sense, hoisted the National Health Service very much to the forefront of our thinking, and the value of their work as medics and nurses. We start to see these images infiltrating very much the graffiti artists of cities. And again, as I say, representing very much those kind of social, economic topics that those urban artists so often draw upon. And I think what was really joyful was seeing the emergence of those homemade symbols. So what's interesting, when we have this kind of, I suppose, a collective experience, and if we think about memorials and we think about public spaces, and we think about the kind of work that is made to represent and to bring us together and to collectively remember, but also collectively experience. And we've seen all kinds of imagery that has come out over centuries. So particularly we have the poppy, which represents remembering those that we've lost during times of war. We have the representation of the red twisted ribbon for HIV and AIDS. We have also a similar one, which is pink, which represents remembering and celebrating and supporting those that have suffered, lost, and have kind of dealt with breast cancer. So we see that sort of symbology which emerges from the public. And here we see in the UK, and I'm sure there have been multiple symbols around the world, the use of the rainbow. And what's been really wonderful about this is the adoption of this as a very simple kind of childlike representation of hope and of thanks and of joy, actually. And these have been quite extraordinary lockdown images of individuals and families just really sending out their kind of recognition and support for the national health system. And of course, you may have seen, and I know this has happened around the world, that kind of every Thursday evening, every single member of the public coming out onto their doorstep and clapping in this kind of performative, collective way to thank the NHS for their work on the doorstep every night, every Thursday evening at the same time. I think it was 7 o'clock, if I remember precisely. So these kind of artworks in the window, this kind of and the window, I suppose, is that representation of that barrier between, you know, the kind of inward space of the home, that domestic kind of barrier, and that sort of window into the world outside, of which so many individuals were not able to enter for so much time. So I'm sure that the image of the rainbow will stay with us for quite some time. And of course, the closure of galleries and museums during the pandemic has meant that institutions have had to recalibrate their purpose and find new ways of reaching people. And of course, for some universities and galleries, this has meant embracing the digital with the virtual exhibitions and tours. And I'm sure many of you have actually entered those virtual spaces. And as I said earlier, I think this is not going to stop. I think this will have changed the world of how we curate and how we share and how we display collections. So I think this is something which we will definitely be embracing. And we've seen the emergence of the virtual degree show all around the world, and we don't see that as disappearing. And we've also seen that kind of higher engagement, haven't we? We've seen that broader global engagement. And straight after this event today, I'll be joining colleagues in India. So this is actually, you know, really created a kind of opportunity using Zoom and Teams and other platforms to access other worlds and to be able to travel without traveling. So this is potentially going to become a way, I think, that we will see shows and collections in museums. So there's also a sort of a democratizing of these particular spaces. So we see this as being something incredibly important. And I do love the fact that despite all of the challenges of the pandemic, You know, we are still seeing members of the public wanting to enter those museum spaces and enjoy those collections. But certainly the idea of accessing new audiences and making collections available to those that might not normally go to museums is a really interesting area, and I'm sure it will be feeding many new areas of research. And I think also the idea of using these collections as a new educational resource and making that more available to that cultural and social capital building for our young people into the future is a really important element and a benefit of these new changes. But for other museums and galleries, it's been about contemplating how to remember this time in decades or centuries to come through the materials and artifacts that have been created. And we're seeing a whole new, as I said, in terms of the new art forms that we're seeing in urban art on the streets. And we're also seeing this kind of new subject material where we're seeing portraits of NHS workers now as the kind of, you know, we would have seen in the 16th and 17th and 18th century nobility being the subject of portraits. Now we're seeing the layperson, the average kind of worker, frontline worker, becoming the hero of the public. And we're seeing this kind of collection of artifacts and photographs. The pieces of film, which I would have shown today, but I was worried that it might not stream well, of lockdown cities, these new pieces of film that have been created in these silent spaces when we first went into lockdown, like we'll never see them again. So these are incredibly important artifacts and which will never be recreated again into the future. But we also know that the arts and culture contribution in communities goes way beyond just the economic. And so as part of the post-COVID recovery, we know that it will bring positive impacts to our people and our societies. We know that it's important in terms of a sense of place and community cohesion. We know that it's important in terms of cultural identity and cultural building, health and well-being of societies, but also education and social mobility of those within those communities, and the impact of having an education in the creative sector. And the Arts Council England did a really interesting piece of research which really looked to make tangible the value of arts and culture to people and society just over the last couple of years. That's been a really emerging area in the UK. And so just to identify some of those benefits, we see that arts and culture can reduce social exclusion and isolation, and it's very much been the case during the pandemic, but it can create safer and stronger communities, a sense of a safer place to live. Students who study art subjects, it was demonstrated through this piece of research, were more likely to be employed actually than many other subjects that are studied, despite the view that they aren't quite as employable, but also that they stay in employment. And we've recently had the Leo data and had some quite interesting kind of sometimes slight negative discourse around creative subjects and employability in the UK. But in fact, we see that they stay in employment much longer, and in fact with a longer career trajectory than many other areas. We also see from this research that 60% of people are more likely to report good health if they attend a cultural event, certainly within a year. Every year, if they attend one cultural event, they will live longer and happier and healthier. In terms of arts and culture also having a positive impact on particular health conditions, we've seen that they can contribute to important increases in health around dementia, Parkinson's, anxiety and depression. And children who participate in arts and culture are 20% more likely to volunteer later on in their lives. So to become those kind of global, active and responsible citizens. And 78% of children shown through this research that if they engage with music as part of their sort of daily learning, a part of their education at school, they were more likely to improve their performance in other core subjects. And of course, we know that there's a strong link to tourism with arts and culture. And with 10 million visitors that came to the UK, out of those 10 million, they all visited a cultural event or venue during their visit. So it's really important in terms of that culture and heritage piece. And indeed, that's the case around the world. So in terms of the role of creativity, in my last couple of slides, I'd like to just touch on, what is the role of creativity in post-COVID recovery? We know that businesses are going to need creativity to be able to recover. We've seen in evidence with the last recession, certainly in the UK and around the world, it was those that were innovative and creative that really bounced back. And we know that creativity is going to have a significant role in this COVID recovery. So they're now, businesses are now operating against that backdrop of kind of uncertainty, and many are really struggling around the globe. We know that kind of almost a third of businesses that closed during the pandemic will not reopen, and particularly those small, medium enterprises. And they're having to really adapt and change their approach in terms of they will not be able to, in a sense, operate either in the way that they've advertised, in the way that they've branded themselves. Their messaging has had to change, but also their internal organization has had to really shift. And before COVID-19, I think this is very interesting when we look at advertising. The advertising and brand campaigns tended to sell an ideal, but I think that during the pandemic, this has really fundamentally changed the society and our values and the way that we live. And so those material desires have kind of taken a step back, and our consumers are now searching for things that are more meaningful in terms of the way that our companies are advertising. And we see that they're searching for companies that they can trust and believe in. And we see companies changing their advertising messaging to fit into those needs. They want those brands that are honest and empathetic, and with whom they have a genuine emotional connection. And this means that these businesses can't just rely on those kind of immediate sort of push methods of campaigns, but need to find more creative ways of reaching consumers in a sort of more meaningful emotional capture. So it's changed the kind of conversation that consumers want from their brands. So we also know that it will be important in terms of local communities and a sense of place and how it helps those to recover. So local creative industries are seen to be a cornerstone of recovery for our communities and local economies. And we can see the creative economy through place and the way in which arts and culture can unlock the potential of those creative communities to come together and to bounce forwards towards a better society and economy. And in the UK, our creative economies are seen as an economic powerhouse, bringing people back into towns and cities as we reopen those city centres. And as we have them as high streets in the UK, we kind of reopen the high street. And with so many potentially unused spaces due to closures of business, creativity is going to have a particular role in occupying those spaces with pop-up creative exhibitions and performances. So the cities are going to need those creative communities to bring it back to life. So they are going to be intrinsic in building atmosphere back into that sense of place and civic pride. So in terms of also that role of creativity in post-COVID recovery is around the mental health and well-being. We see the arts and culture as it comes back, as theatres open, as performances start again, as we see exhibitions being able to be booked to go to attend them. This sense of normality of those things happening again, those things that we loved to go and see, that we love to experience together, will give us a sense of of restoring, of recovery, but most importantly of normality. And we've been talking for so long now about the new normal. So I think this is a key aspect of hope and returning back to that life that we did know before the pandemic. And it will reactivate that reopening of cities and town centres and give that confidence, I think, to human beings and those communities that we can, in fact, return and enjoy public and social events again. So thank you very much for listening. My very best seasonal best wishes to everybody at SUIC for a happy and obviously healthy new year from all of us at Birmingham City University. Thank you so much for listening, and I am very happy to take any questions that anybody may want to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Alison. So I think online one of your colleagues is here. Nathan Tromans, are you here? Professor Nathan, I would say. No? Okay. And also we have your colleagues from Vienna who are here. Professor Bernhard and Martina Hasselberg also should be here. Oh, hello. Oh, Nathan with his guitar is here. So yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. Living in Thailand right now, we see what's happening in Europe with curious eyes, and we hope you are all fine there. I am not sure what is the situation in UK right now. I think you have to work from home for Christmas, I guess.
Yeah, so let me just making sure that you can hear me.
Yes, we do.
You can hear me.
Yes.
Very good. Yeah, so we have a tier system in the UK. So we have areas of the country in different tiers. Okay. So depending on the severity of cases, we have situations around the country where we have different rules and different laws in terms of how much we can be mobile. We certainly are having quite a quieter Christmas. And I think, many of us, we are able to see family, but many of us are taking the decision to not put our elderly relatives at risk and to have quite a small scale Christmas celebration in the UK, which is a small price we hope to pay. But with the vaccination now it started to roll out last week, and certainly in Birmingham, the first vaccinations were given, I think, over 10 days ago now. Okay. And our health teams are helping to deliver that at this very moment in the city.
You talk a lot about the creative industries, but what about the creative education? How did COVID impact you as a university? How did you cope with it? And did you learn something out of it? Are you going to apply this also in the future? Use some of the experience you had?
Absolutely. I think what it's taught us is that students and certainly that generation that we're teaching really enjoy the ability to learn online. And I think it comes from that kind of popular culture of being able to digest and consume content when they want to. And of course, we have mixed feelings about this, don't we, as educators, because we want our students to turn up on time and to be disciplined and to be there. But I think we've had to learn to be more flexible and to understand the flexible needs of the learner. And but actually what we've seen, contrary to our anxieties that they wouldn't attend or that they wouldn't participate, actually is that the virtual space has created a different type of studio atelier place for learning. And in fact, we've had probably more engagement. And despite the fact that we might have seen some of those students still there attending, but they might have their pajamas on in their home spaces, they are there.
To that.
And they are contributing. And of course, but we have done 50% delivery face to face.
Hello, can I make a quick interruption?
Yes.
Can we close the sharing screen, please? Just so that we can see. Yes. Alison, can you stop sharing the screen?
Alison, could you stop sharing your screen? You can keep your camera on. But
I will try. I only have I'm not getting the, oh, I see. Okay, let me just see if I can unshare this.
Probably have to click on it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not getting the option to unshare. So that's interesting. Let me just see if I can, if I stop video, maybe that will, I'm not sure whether that will.
We use Microsoft Teams in here, so Zoom is.
Yeah, same here. This is, I can't seem to unshare, which is kind of interesting. If I stop my video, I'm not sure whether you might lose me.
We don't want to lose you, Alison.
I don't know why. It won't let me stop sharing. If I close it,
this is part of the COVID-19 experience, ladies and gentlemen, of getting used to tools. We had that problem a lot. Hello?
We most certainly are learning. Oh, huh.
Did we lose the connection or
I think
on the screen?
little technical difficulties, but we will be back up soon for sure.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can
yes.
hear you. We just lost your
But you
face.
can't see me. My video is
No.
on, but for some
But we
reason,
still can talk. I think it still works.
yeah, we can still talk. We can
Well,
still
maybe
talk.
I'm gonna ask some questions to the panelists or also in the audience, if anyone wants to ask something to Professor Allison. Bernhard, can you say something? Maybe to test you. Hello.
Hello, nice to be here.
We're going to talk with you soon, but if you have any question for Professor Allison, please don't hesitate.
I have to say I was only able to hear the last part of the presentation. I'm very sorry, Alison, because also the part of the COVID experience, I realized that my internet connection at home was very weak this morning. And so I jumped on my bicycle and drove to the university and just made it in time to be here with a stable connection.
Yes, thank you so much, Bernhard. I was a bit worried about that, but you are on time. Anyone in the audience would like to ask questions? All right, Professor Chris.
Does my microphone works? Good afternoon. I might have a little bit a naughty question.
As usual.
As usual. You talked about recovery of the economy. I think there's a fierce discussion in some countries about if we have to go to the same type of economy we had before COVID. That's one, because I think, and you see that in many, many countries, and this country is world champion in economic inequality, but that also happens in European countries and in the US. The gap between rich and poor only got bigger and bigger and bigger in the last 20 years. And I think we should really think about going back to that economy, because that's probably one of the problems we had. That's also maybe one of the things which make COVID worse. I think the main question is not COVID. The main question is how we react on this kind of things. That makes that, let's say in some countries, we have a kind of collective fear. Yesterday, this week, I asked in my classes, the students, if they are afraid of COVID. Everybody is afraid of COVID, not me. In this country, we have 60 people dying dead from COVID, and we have about 4,000 infected people. The whole country is looking TV in the evening where there are 10 affected people, and everybody is afraid. This is what's happening. It's a kind of collective mass psychology. And that's not, we're not going to solve that with individual art or something like that. And that is my main, next to that, a lot of things that we are going to do will cost money. And on a world level, people expect that a lot of people in this world go back to the poverty levels of 30 years ago, and not for 1 year, for the coming decades. That means for a lot of people, there is no money to invest in everything. That's for the rich, nice, but not for the main people. So we have to cope with the fact that we all have to have less income, so we don't have money to spend also. Can art and design do something about that?
Well, it's a huge question, isn't it? I mean, I think you're right in terms of, and thank you for the question. You know, I think that when we have something like a world pandemic, it exposes the areas of deprivation. So we saw digital deprivation prevail significantly across communities, and we have students. We have one of the highest numbers of students from the lowest socioeconomic groups in the UK. So around 47% of our students at Birmingham City University come from what we call the lowest polar quintile, which has, and I think we have 6,500 students with the lowest income levels that you can have in terms of family income. So this was a huge challenge for us. And so I think the learning from that, and it's something that we're working really hard on at the moment, and I think it's been a case for all universities around the world, to close that gap around digital deprivation. I think that's a really key element. and working with those big companies like Dell and others, Apple, that actually create and make these devices. We need to think about a social economy where some of those really essential learning tools are made available for children, so that no child should have a barrier to their learning because of digital deprivation. So that's the first thing I think that we really need to look at in terms of those social economies, where we can try to even out some of those that have and those that have not. And I think, certainly whenever you have those challenges of economies, and I think certainly the pandemic showed the rich and the poor divide much more so. And we talked about screening, didn't we, when we went into the immediate effects of the pandemic. We talked about protecting the vulnerable. But what we didn't know at that time is how much social economy was going to affect those that are vulnerable. And so I think it's really heightened that divide. And you're absolutely right. Do we want to return to that? Do we want to actually do we want to go back to that world is a really important question. And do we reset and rethink what a social economy looks like, which is a huge piece of work. And we know that social economists have tried to explore this in terms of social entrepreneurship, in terms of social innovation approaches, a space that I've also worked in myself, with round it up, round it down schemes, with banks actually, having really interesting ways of contributing much more to a social economy, minimum wages, etc. And I think this will bring, I think the pandemic will bring these discussions to the forefront. And I think, if we can work as global nations towards thinking about what does a social economy for all look like, to reduce those levels of poverty as a result of the learnings of the pandemic, then of course that would be a huge positive outcome. But I think that will take quite some time to move away from the individual concern, the concern of the individual and the individual wealth, into thinking about what does global wealth look like.
Thank you, Professor Allison. Is there any more questions to ask?
Hello, Professor Allison. Dino here. Always a joy to hear from you. I was really interested to hear that you were saying that studios and movie productions are on a rise. And it's a bit of a conundrum because the actual theaters industries, they're even wondering whether they're going to survive. Award shows are being disrupted. Major players, tentpole movies, directors, they're all having upsets and problems over how that their movies are going to be viewed. Just what are your thoughts on this interesting conundrum? The conundrum being a decrease in viewing and movies, but an increase in production.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. And working with producers such as Stephen Knight, what he's learning, and when he's creating his studio at the moment, he's thinking very much around that, the impact on the environment. So he's taking and embracing the opportunities of the virtual studio set. So there's several things here. There's the less traveling, the emissions, the kind of emissions footprints. He's really thinking about this kind of new studio environment that is green, that is much more socially responsible in terms of its practices. And but certainly there is that challenge between excuse me, the home consuming, so bringing theatre, TV and content and experiences into the home is a really interesting area. But yes, I think Dina, your question around where does that leave the kind of public spaces, so that private to public space conundrum is a significant one. And I think, I think they could be the most hard hit out of the pandemic, actually. But I think what we will see, and it would be a very sad and lonely community space if we only sat in our homes, sort of digesting and experiencing those theatre productions, the films, the TV content, the binge watching of series back to back. I don't think any of us particularly want to do that all of the time. So I think we will see a bounce back, and I think possibly we might see a huge bounce back, because I think we will, as human beings, bearing in mind that we are social animals, and this is what we need to do. We need to be with others and experience things with others. I think we will see that come back, but I think we might find that they are more intimate experiences. So we won't see the mass events come back in full force quite yet. But I think in the interim, the film and TV companies, they are, they're reducing their crews. They are training those individuals to have multiple skills. So our graduates will need to be very different in terms of the skills when they emerge. And I'm kind of learning from those industries at the moment, what is it that they're going to need? So we've always been mindful, haven't we, in the creative industries and the creative subjects, about those emerging jobs that we don't even know that are going to be available. And when already our students, are working within the world of influencing and blogging and social media and have careers as YouTubers that we don't really understand, perhaps from certainly my generation, but they are carving these new careers. And I think we're going to see the kind of content creators of the future potentially creating that content in many different ways, not just through large scale location film shoots. And I think the use of virtual set building, set design, we're going to see much more so within theatre, but also within film. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's really thoughts.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much for the positive outlook. And I hope and I agree with you that public viewing will survive in some form.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, thank you, Professor Allison. Next, we're going to invite on next two key speakers from the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. Thank you again, Professor Allison. I would like to introduce you Bernhard Kernegger and Martina Hasselberger. So Bernhard Kernegger is a Vice Rector for Academic Affairs and Development at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna. Am I right? Yes, okay, so far so good. A pianist and piano pedagogue, Bernhard used the skills he learned in music to reflect on the responsibility of university on issues concerning standardization in a multicultural context. Bernhard also is a UNINET member, an organization promoting sustainable development in universities, being the chair of that work group for dialogue and societal responsibility. He will be joined by Martina Hasselberger, university assistant at the Institute of Conservation at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna. Her background is conservation, restoration, and cultural property. Am I right? Sorry for this. She has trained students and coordinated projects in Nepal and Mongolia, and she worked very closely with the UNESCO on conservation and preservation. They will both present us creative education, art, and design practice during pandemic. Thank you. Your turn.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. I know it's afternoon in Bangkok, but the experience at the moment is interesting. It's so different to the last time when I had the honor to be part of a conference organized by SUIC. And it's mixed feelings we have, I think. It's true that it gets much easier to connect internationally, but also a lot of aspects are not as present as they could. When I compare to my last experience, there was so much more focus on the event. There was the traveling, also the jet lag, of course. There was the incredible hospitality of the SUIC team. There were several days to emerge in discussions. Compared to now, I had already 2 appointments in the morning. Then, as I already said, I rushed to the university because of the internet connection. Afterwards, I will go to something completely different again. So it's really a very mixed experience, and I totally agree with Allison, who said it has a potential for democratization. On the other hand, it also has a potential for social exclusion. because like I experienced, and this is not the best example one could have. If the internet connection is weak, then all at once participation is much limited. And this is true for a lot of our students who struggle with not so big spaces at home, so their working capabilities are reduced. Technical equipment is a problem as well. Yeah, I will now start the presentation because I learned that the audience at Cat Tower is not able to see the presentation and the speaker at once, so I wanted to be a bit visible for you before I turn to the presentation. Well, I will talk a bit about the specific experience of our university, also concerning the question that was raised before about how the institution did react. And before I do that, I will, presentation is not clickable. Now it is. I will think a bit about the context, because normally as a higher education institution, government usually works like this. There is a discussion process about an institution's vision, strategies. Later on, there are action plans and specific actions taken. Normally, there is sort of evaluation in the context of quality management, for instance, and afterwards, you talk about improvement, further development, and so on. Maybe the vision is renewed. You know that process very well, I guess. In the crisis, this was completely different. Everything started with an emergency. Then immediate action needed to be taken. We soon had some short or midterm plans for further action. All along, when there was time in this stressful period, implicit learning happens. Some reflection processes have started. And in the end, perhaps, there might emerge a change in the vision of the institutions or even in higher education policies. So when you compare those two tracks, it's really very different. But in the end, a lot of change was possible. And one of the goals of university management, of course, is transformation, reacting to a changing society, come up with answers that can help to tackle those challenges. So if we compare how much transformation has happened during the last summer semester, this COVID situation, and how much transformation we are normally able to achieve, the second track is not worse than the first, just when you compare the outcomes. Question is, how do we cope with the outcomes? Because they were not planned, they were not envisioned. So the big challenge will be to really go in and reflect what kind of learnings we want to take with us and what kind of outcomes we need to abandon again, because, as I said, they could be socially exclusive, or they are just undesired effects nobody would ever wish for. On the other hand, the abilities we acquired in working together, also internationally, are just incredible. So the consequences for this keynote will be that I will not start with big ideas, but I will browse through some of exemplary actions that were taken in order to just allow reflection and learning. I will not go into that too deep because I think it's very specific for every context. So I would just invite you to take out whatever is interesting for you, whatever you think can be translated or just inspire additional developments. I will not talk about our university as this is done normally because there is not so much time, but there is a web page, and of course Angewandte is a wonderful arts university that I can recommend to look into it. Just to give a short overview of the corona pandemic, so we're on the same page. In late February, there were the first cases. We even got quite famous, unfortunately, because from one place in Ischgl, from one event location. In fact, the virus spread through large parts of Europe, who all were in Austria at this time, skiing and partying. Yeah, first reactions were taken, and then on March 11th, the closing was announced and the switch to distance learning. So from 16th March on, there was this first hard lockdown with strict restrictions to stay at home, which is in Austria just the start of the semester. Semester starts in the beginning of March, so this was really hindering all activities in the moment. So how did the university react? How did we react? There are some crucial moments I want to share. Some of them were lucky, some of them were driven by intuition, some of them were planned. So our university crisis team decided quite soon to give the situation a name, although the discussion in Austria was like, we need to lock down for 2 weeks and then everything might be fine again. We had the suspicion that this might not be the case, and it's good to name the enemy. We established almost daily communication, and we took a very early decision to stay in this alternate mode with not using the premises in most cases until the end of the semester. With the obvious reason to allow planning. All courses that could not be transferred to this alternate mode, so to online or distance ways of teaching, were cancelled, and the transformation process was supported by a team of distance learning that was established quite in the beginning, which was a team connecting the different levels of university. So there were technicians on board, obviously, but also teachers, administration members, and also management. So the reflection loops, the feedback could run very quickly. Teachers put in their needs, technicians put in the possibilities. And although we didn't use online tools at all, almost in the beginning, it was quite miraculously possible to create that in 1 or 2 weeks' time. Next big decision was that we decided to keep up with our festival that was introduced the year before only, and also put it into a distance mode, and also announced this already in April. As a result, a creative and robust space for focusing was created, and this space then lasted from April to June, and I think this was a big advantage in the end, because all the discussions on how long will that this alternate mode last, and is it reasonable to put a lot of effort into developing different teaching approaches, all that didn't need to take place, and people could focus on creative and feasible solutions. So, as promised, some examples of action. There were examples of totally replaced teaching content. I think the best example here is the Institute of Conservation and Restoration, and this is why I invited Martina to join me here to give some more insight in that. I found it was amazing because the field of conservation and restoration obviously is very much connected to history, traditional objects, and this quick transformation of their agenda was a very good example for what was possible in this semester, from my point of view. There were packages of material created for students working at home. So that could be basic workshop tools. Our ceramic studios sent out clay, and students could work on that, send it back to be fired and produced. There were electronic kits sent out, so people in a video conference could put things together and do the experiments. There were quite some outdoor activities, as distance learning, distance teaching does not necessarily mean to go to online spaces, especially after the first weeks of lockdown, when outdoor activities were more possible. There were quite some courses also exploring these possibilities of interacting without coming too close, of course. Yeah, and the online formats still took a core role, exploring the technical possibilities with diverse artistic approaches. Lately, we discovered a whiteboard tool, Miro, that allowed a 2-day strategic meeting of the Senate and Directorate to go into a future vision process. So, yeah, that was that. Very important was a frequent exchange of good teaching practice. So teachers were invited from the beginning to not only be on their own with their ideas for transformations in teaching, but there was a frequent possibility at the beginning every week, then a bit reduced over the time. So they could inspire each other with their approaches. Yeah, and the festival and the structure of the festival allowed to announce that all graduation projects will have to take place in virtual space. And this also was announced in April. So students who wanted to graduate, they knew that they would need to come up with something that can be shown online, or even that they can frame their projects in a way that they are made for online appearance. So many projects do not have a physical representation, as the majority normally works, but only this virtual representation. Yeah, I think another key factor was the flexible use of human resources and the spirit that people wanted to help out each other. For instance, the event team that was like jobless at this point of time, they quickly volunteered and worked as a support team for all the new online tools, because the IT services couldn't handle this amount of requests, of course. Yeah, and then for concluding with my part of the presentation, I want to give some insight in the Angewandte Festival, because I think this was something really interesting with a lot of potential for the future. So we were facing, as I already stated before, that in art universities, graduation without public creating artworks, without the possibility to show them, is really depressing. We just had the festival format developed last year. To cancel it after a successful first round didn't seem like a good idea. But to implement the necessary websites that needs to be interactive and cool, so to say, within very limited time, didn't seem feasible. So it was decided to try that. It took many sleepless nights of a group of very engaged colleagues. And in the end, by the end of June, there were 3.5 days of live program and all the diploma works shown. I've got the webpage for you and some impressions. So this is the main entrance of Angewandte, normally quite a crowded place. In these times, there were only some empty chairs, and we had 23, I missed the English word, this posts for advertisements. So 23 of those we had in the 23 districts of Vienna. So in order to emphasize that virtual spaces alone are too little, and we need the physical representation as well. This was the festival headquarters. You can see our festival coordinator here, connected to the technical festival headquarters with a lot of IT, obviously. There was live program DJ lines in the evening, broadcast from our main event area that was empty again, unusually. And in the end, we had a festival team that was quite content with what was achieved. For concluding, I just want to give you a quick insight into this festival page, which is present as an archive still. So it's a zoomable page. You can see all the festival contributions here, and in the middle there was the timeline for the live program that is now the archive. And by zooming in, it's possible to see the single contributions. Many of them are combined with videos. And for an example, there is, for instance, this activity of Arts Goes Home. This was one fine example of a diploma of a graduation project where students worked on artworks they already had, renting them out to people. People could apply for borrowing an artwork for some time. They put it up in their flats, and then there was a discussion of the experience. So how this artwork influenced the situation, especially in this Corona time, where you really spend huge amounts of time at home. Yeah, and I want to show one diploma presentation because the interesting thing is that, as I mentioned before, the diploma, the graduation works really took a different stance compared to normally. This is an example from industrial design. So normally they produce objects with a lot of thinking, clever ideas, innovative models, prototypes. But in this case, it was also about creating this virtual representation. And so in this case, a video came out, and I just want to show you the first 1 or 2 minutes to get the impression.
How's it going? Mitch here. Another great episode here today of Cook, Love, and Live Life. Everything you need to know about living a healthy and balanced lifestyle. Let's welcome Nhs Hirschmath. Hirschmath. Yes, Nhs.
Hi.
So great to
Hi,
see you.
Mitch. Nice to
Yes,
see you.
great. Well, why don't you
Thanks
take
for having me.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here with us today. We're going to start with a couple great meals here. You've got so much prepared. I don't even know where you're going to start. Tell me.
I was thinking that we should start with breakfast
Yes.
because, I mean, you need to be balanced.
Absolutely.
And to be balanced, you need a proper breakfast.
Yes.
So I like to do scrambled eggs.
Yes, I
With
love
bacon.
scrambled eggs. Everyone loves scrambled eggs, a classic American dish. That's how the day gets started, right?
So let me cook up some eggs and bacon.
Great, great.
I'm going to use my balanced bowl.
Now this is
Well, this is
interesting.
actually my balanced pot, and it's made out of copper, and it retains the heat, and it heats up really quick. So it only takes a couple of minutes to make these eggs. So I'm going to turn it down
Now,
a
let's
little.
make sure our audience really sees this. This is quite remarkable.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can take it by the balls right
Yes,
here.
please
I'm gonna take
it by the balls.
And then right here, you have an amazing design. Now this isn't a conventional bowl, I would say. This is a bowl I haven't seen, maybe in like some of those Chinese restaurants, Mongolian beef
like a
food.
wok.
Yes, it kind of
Yeah.
looks like a wok, but
It's
different.
not.
It's not.
It's not.
And that.
So I think I will stop here with this insight into the Angewandte Festival, and now pass on to Martina, who will add the experience of the Conservation and Restoration Institute. Can you reshare the screen? Second, yeah.
Thank you very much, Bernhard, for this introduction and overview of the general strategic planning of the University of Applied Arts, and also the examples what was done in the alternate mode during the last year. And as promised, I will now provide you another example, a case study, namely the alternate mode at the Institute of Conservation at Angewandte. Next slide, please. At the beginning, I would like to tell you some words about our institute and our study program. So in non-pandemic times, or actually also now, but we offer a diploma study program in conservation restoration, which takes 5 years and gives different specialization areas. So conservation of paintings, objects, stone, and textile. And our study program includes different subjects, including conservation science lectures, natural science lectures, history of art and culture, and a particular emphasis is on practical conservation, on hands-on. As you can see here, our students get more than half of the credits of the whole diploma program for practical work, for working in the studios and workshops. And as Bernhard said, just this because this is probably different to Thailand and other countries, our academic year is divided in 2 terms, winter semester, October to January, and summer semester from March to June. And as Bernhard already mentioned, the COVID pandemic struck directly at the beginning of the summer semester, at the beginning of March. Next slide, please. So here you see some impressions of the practical work at the Institute during non-pandemic times. So it's from the previous years, some impressions showing our students working on original objects, so on historic objects from museums, from private collections, from church during the term. So practice is very, very important in our program and in the education and training for conservators restorers. Next slide, please. So our question was now what to do in the alternate mode. What should we do? It was very unexpectedly that we had to face this situation, how to teach these practical skills in distance mode. So we had no access to the studios, with no equipment at home. Our students had no equipment at home. The objects they were working on were in the objects, so not at home. We had additionally different students. As I said before, we offer different specializations. We also had students at different stages of the study progress. So from first year to the diploma students in the 5th year, they all had different needs, different knowledge where they are. And what we wanted for them also during the alternate mode is that they all benefited from the program. So we said, well, let's focus on the future. Next slide, please. And what we did is we thought about future challenges for conservative restorers. And we established or defined 4 working groups, areas, future challenges we would like to work on with our students during the summer term. And these working groups you see here, the first one focusing on climate change and cultural heritage, so particularly on the impact climate change will have on the preservation of cultural heritage. We thought about deterioration mechanisms that will change due to climate change, slow and extreme events. The second working group focusing on sustainability in museum and storage. So this working group was designed to think about eco-friendly strategies for the conservation studio, for storage and museum, and also think about sustainable materials to use in conservation restoration. The third one dealt with delicate cultural heritage. So this includes human remains, looted artifacts, objects with troubled past, or artifacts that are used for religious purposes or are considered sacred. These are also objects and conservator restorer frequently has to deal with, and we wanted to focus more on that in working group 3. And the last working group was dedicated to risk prevention, emergency preparedness, and first aid. and they focused on risks, hazards, and vulnerabilities for cultural heritage, and on probable prevention, risk assessment and planning, and also what to do if an emergency strikes. Next slide, please. So our students could then divide on these 4 working groups, and this gave us really diverse groups because all specializations mixed up, beginners up to diploma candidates mixed up, so it was very nice and productive. And each working group then met once a week, online via Zoom. And in these sessions, we discussed case studies, we did literature reviews, we discussed a lot. We also had 15 international guest lectures. That was also a major benefit, let's say, from the current crisis, because a lot of reputable experts worldwide were available for guest lectures because it was much easier for them to give them to us. And the lectures were also open for everybody, so for the whole University of Applied Arts. And it was received very well. So we had up to 60 to 70 participants at these lectures, much more than we have in normal times. And at the end, each of the students choose an individual topic related to their working group, and they prepared a presentation, the research paper. So they also pursued individual research during the semester. Next slide, please. So this was an insight into how we dealt with the alternate mode during the diploma program. But I also would like to say a few words about international project work in times of a pandemic, because our institute is actively engaged in international activities and international project work since 2004, so for a very long time. And here you can see an impression of the Patan Durbar Square, a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Nepal, where we are active since 2010 and regularly implement conservation campaigns on site together with local partners. But this was certainly not possible during this year, as everywhere, all over the world, international project work was halted or came to a stop. So the question was what to do, how to be internationally active when facing travel restrictions and lockdowns in this crisis, and how to continue. Next slide, please. So again, we decided to shift everything to the virtual space. And what we did is we implemented, on one hand, online lecture series. Here you see 2 examples, multi-day events that were also open to our international partners. So we tried to keep contact, to exchange in the virtual space, to build up knowledge, transfer knowledge, and work together, learn together, and from and with each other. And we also had an international summer school dedicated to preventive conservation and collection care. And these activities allowed our international partners and institutions from India, Mongolia, China, Nepal, and also Thailand to join and to stay in contact. And we also had international partners as guest lecturers. Next slide, please. So to conclude, actually, we made the most of it, let's say it like that, particularly the online, so that we did our international activities online, let's say, enabled an increased range and coverage and an easier participation for our international partners. So that was certainly a benefit, and it was also environmental friendly and more cost efficient. The alternate mode for the diploma study program was also very well received by our students and staff, and very much appreciated, because it was an opportunity to dedicate attention and much more time to future challenges and current topics, as I mentioned, climate change, sustainability, risk prevention, which are important for conservators, restorers, and affect conservation practice. But normally, during a normal study program, we don't have so much time to tackle these topics. So the general ideas, particularly sustainability, we will maintain this and also try to include it in our future lecture formats and initiatives at the Institute. So there will be an impact certainly on how we will teach in the future. But next slide, please. We also learned that for international project work, the relationship and the personal meetings are decisive, and we can't work without that. So on-site work will be still important, and we hope for the next year that we can continue this with our international partners. And we also learned, or have to say, that conservation practice is crucial in conservation training programs for us. So currently, it is again possible that our students are in the workshops through adherence to hygiene measures, distance, keeping the maximum number of students, and also because our university is very eager and is very emphasizing that students can work again, can practice again, because practice is in all the study programs at Angewandte, very important. And next, please. And after this conclusion, allow me some final notice regarding conservation practice is crucial. I would like to raise your attention to a new joint master program between Silberkorn University and the University of Applied Arts, which has this focus on international conservation practice, which will allow students to gain extensive experience in that and in cultural heritage management, as well as art and cultural history. So if you're interested in this study program, I can only highly recommend you to get in contact. Here you see the mail address. And with this, I would like to hand over back to Bernhard for our final conclusion and remarks.
There is just one final slide. Also from our side, I just received this yesterday, and it's also a nice example of these kits that are sent out to people. It's only in German, but you can see this is like a toolkit to have a Christmas party via Zoom, and you have all the necessary ingredients, from the candle to there is some hidden alcohol inside, some chocolate, some goodies. So the idea is that colleagues can meet and have a little Zoom Christmas party, and that's what we also wish to you. Merry Christmas, and especially a Happy New Year with a lot of safety and inspiring ideas. Thank you for your attention in the name of both of us.
Thank you, both of you. Actually, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Not yet. You have to wait New Year for that normally. That's what we do in France. I don't know in Germany, in Austria, if you have the same thing. It's bad luck to wish New Year.
It's good luck.
It's good luck. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, perfect. I would like my audience, if you have any questions to ask. Yes, please, Dino.
So, hello?
Hello.
Testing, testing. Okay, I'm back. So this is an open question to both of you. I noticed that you were talking about the COVID, a lot of disruptions, such as no public viewing, social distancing. Would you like just to share with us how you're dealing with the disappointment from your students? We here in Thailand have had long dialogues and conversations with our students. Of course, they're understanding. But again, you know, it's heartbreaking for them and it's disappointing. Do you want to share with any experiences or how you have dealt with that?
Well, perhaps I start, and Martina, if you want to add something. On the one hand, it helps, of course, that there are a lot of activities, and students also see that there are a lot of activities, and they appreciate that we just not fall into depression altogether. But what we observed is that the usual problems that are normally not so important, or the tensions in groups, or the overall social climate, this is really becoming a challenge when people are isolated. For instance, we had a really big discussion because students from foreign countries in Europe pay less tuition fees than students from outside of Europe due to our national regulations. And this became a very big issue with a heated discussion. Yeah, very heated discussion. But it's I think it's very useful to have this reference points of still following an agenda and not telling people that everything is fine and that we learn a lot, but that we do the compromises as best as we can. And normally we find acceptance with that, with some exceptions.
Yeah,
Okay, I have one question. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Maybe you have an answer.
Sorry, only a few words. I would also say that actually I can only speak from our students at the Institute of Conservation. We have about 50, so a very institute, let's say, but all of them actually very highly appreciated that, as Bernhard say, we did not just were very negative and did nothing, but communicated very early, very regularly with them, updated them on everything, and that we came up within 2 weeks, so over Easter vacation, with a really completely new program for them, what to do instead of the practical work in the workshops. So they were very happy about that, so that they had at least once a week regular contact with us via Zoom, with the other students, and work on something or had some courses, let's say. What is still a problem is particularly our first year students, because due to the reduced time they spend together with other students, it's very difficult for them to establish contacts and to get used to the processes and routines at our institutes. So it's very hard for them, and we try to particularly support them as much as possible. And also our students living in neighboring countries, they also face problems now with Christmas, how to get home, if they should get home. Some of them stayed the last weeks at home and were afraid to come back to Austria because they were not sure, okay, will there be again travel restrictions? Can they go back home? So that's, yeah, very difficult, but we try to stay in contact with all of them and have an open ear for them. And if they have any concerns, any problems, so to try to support them as much as possible.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you. Actually, I have a question about painting restoration. I guess it's very, very difficult to bring any practical back home, right? But in some case, did you actually manage to do something practical during COVID with them? Or you had to do everything online through Zoom and mostly focus on lectures?
Actually, yes, it's very difficult to do practical things at home because the students, many of them don't have any workshops well-equipped workshops at home. They probably share their flat with some other students, so not a lot of space. What we, at the beginning, we thought that we can probably give them some things to practice, so to practice retouching on kind of self-made dummies, to practice different painting techniques. But we then decided, okay, we will completely switch everything for all students equally, from all specializations, to only doing, let's say, theoretical things and thinking about these future challenges. So we decided to, yeah, if it is possible again, to move back to the workshops, that is now possible, because it's just much more easier to work in the
In my case, I teach photography, and I understand, I mean, equipment is also important for us, but for you, you really need a workshop and a lot of little accessories that, in my case, I had to adapt and let them shoot with whatever they had. And we think the homework to be done within the space they had, which is very challenging. But I'm guessing in your case, it was pretty difficult to deal with that.
Yeah.
One good thing was that we could allow the graduation students in May and June to enter the workshops to just use the tools and work on their graduation thesis. This wouldn't have been possible otherwise, I think. But luckily, the situation was a bit less bad in May and June. So this was.
Are you planning to do any workshop to catch up during when COVID-19 disappears, or what will be the option for your first year to catch up?
When would you say this would be? This disappearance of COVID-19?
Well, I don't know. In UK, they seems to have vaccine already, so we assume hopefully within a few months. But I try not to be too hopeful anymore.
we hope so too. Yeah, of course. There will be activities. We had even in September, there was a workshop aperitif. What was the title of this? This was just a situation where everything was almost normal, only with some more distance. So that was an opportunity for students to get some extra experiences and also necessary gradings. Yeah.
Is there any more questions or in the room? I think that's it. Thank you so much. I hope I will see you next year, both of you, if you can come. Thank you for your presentation. It was really appreciated, and I hope you manage to do practical soon.
Thank you for the kind invitation
Bernhard.
and all the best.
Professor Martina.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best.
I would like to introduce you now, my colleagues. Assistant Professor Dr. Shalompon, she will introduce the papers now.
Right. Thank you, Gabriel. Actually, would like to invite Professor Bernhard and also Professor Martina, if she can stay further for another 2 paper session. Let me introduce you to the last paper session. This is session 3 that we really lucky to have our presenter from Manchester Metropolitan University, Mr. Ben McDonald. He has a master's degree in photography from the Royal College of Art, with his undergraduate in jazz, composition, and performance. His work uses photography, sound, and sculpture to raise questions around stability, support, and structure, inspirational around sound, music, and the built environment. And his work has been shown internationally and is held in public and private collections. Today, Mr. Ben will present us with the title name, Dig Where You Stand, an exploration of dialogues and online international exchange project. Ben, are you there? Are you ready?
I am. Hello, everybody.
How are you
Hi.
today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, great. Everybody's looking forward to see your paper.
Great. It's very
Okay.
unusual to see my face broadcast so large, but that's great.
So can you try to share the file first
I
before I
can.
let you?
Can you see this? Is that full screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
I see your face. You look
Okay.
nice. Okay. You can share the screen.
Yeah, okay. 1 second.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. So welcome, and I want to start by thanking Gabriel and all the staff at SUIC for hosting this wonderful event. Thanks, of course, to everybody here for taking the time to listen to this talk, and also to Martina and Bernhard for their presentation this morning. So I'm going to speak for around 20-25 minutes, and then we'll leave some space at the end for some questions. So Dig Where You Stand was an educational movement based in Sweden, and it took its name from a book published in 1978 by Sven Lindqvist. And he advocates for looking at one's own work as a means of starting to understand the context in which we operate. And I quote, "If ordinary people are going to undertake historical research, The history of their jobs is, I think, a very good place to start, end quote. The unprecedented situation in which we have all found ourselves living and working in over the past year has forced us to revive these ideas through standing still and take stock of our working methods. One of the advantages of being immobile and digging in a digitally interconnected environment is that one can, in effect, keep digging until we reach the other side of the world. So I wanted to use this metaphor as a catalyst for reflecting on digital pedagogy, using an example of the international digital collaboration between students and staff from Silvercorn University and Manchester School of Art. I shall use listening and looking as a means of reflecting on the pedagogy of this exchange project. And I'm also going to use the artwork, The Sky of Brooklyn, as a metaphor for the potential pitfalls of this working methodology. If we are to think of the project as an example of starting to dig a path through which to connect with each other, it might be helpful to illustrate where I stand. And this is both to give some context to this paper, but also as a way of introducing myself and my practice, although I was very nicely introduced just then. I'll also use some of these themes to reflect on my own pedagogy. So it was mentioned at the start of the talk, so I'll go over this very quickly, but I'm an artist and an educator, and I currently live and work in London in the UK. I graduated with a master's degree in photography from the Royal College of Art, and my undergraduate degree was in jazz music, from which I graduated in 2004. So as such, my work uses photography, music composition and sculpture to raise questions around stability, support and structure. I draw inspiration from sound and silence in the built environment, and I'm interested in trying to develop a transgressive overlapping of sound and image to create structure in which to experiment, reimagining the image not just as a depictive surface, but a site to be occupied and used. I also regularly work with the graphic score as a means of both making visual work in its own right, also a stimulus for music which can be used as a speculative tool for establishing a temporary inhabitable space. Teaching is also integral to my practice. I'm a lecturer on the Photography BA Honours programme at Manchester School of Art. I've got a PGC in HE, and I'm currently working towards a master's degree in education, and I'm a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. If that piques your interest, have a look at my website. Feel free to follow me on Instagram, support my frail artist ego that way. So this hopefully gives a clear idea of the area which I've defined for myself, the field in which I stand. Linkvist recommends we look at the history of our work as a means of starting the digging process. And I shall address some aspects of this through looking at the shift from offline or IRL teaching to online learning later in this paper. Of course, all this activity has been physically curtailed over the course of the global pandemic. The field of my research is just as fertile, but I'm physically less able to move around within it. With the benefit of hindsight, it seems obvious that the switch to a more sedentary online life meant that we could reach out further. It slowly dawned on us as pedagogues that we could share resources, listen into each other's lectures, and look to working further afield. As anyone working in HE knows, budgetary constraints are often the limiting factor in the implementation of creative projects. And the shift to predominantly working remotely has meant that we could just as easily work with educators and artists, both nationally and internationally. It's against this backdrop we began digging where we stood. So reaching out to SUIC, with whom we'd run a British Council-funded project in 2019. And these are some images from that. So in 2019 in the UK, I formed a relationship between the British Council in London and the photography course at MMU, and they introduced us to this Walls and Beyond project with Silvercorn University and 6 other EU universities. One of our third year students, Victoria Smith, you can see in the bottom left, was selected through open call by the British Council to spend 2 weeks at Silvercorn University and participate in an exhibition at the end of the project. This project was fully funded and proved to be a hugely rewarding experience for Victoria, who went on to get a high first and is currently working for a network of museums in the northwest of the UK, both of which she partly attributes to her time in Thailand. The project was also rewarding for the institutions involved, providing an exchange in ideas, practice, and working methodology. So at this point, I want to use this artwork, The Sky of Brooklyn by Wang Gongxing from 1995, as a further visual metaphor for the digital pedagogy that this project represents. In this work, the artist digs a 3-meter hole in the floor of his Beijing home and places a video monitor at the bottom that plays a recording of the sky he made whilst on residence in Brooklyn. This work, of course, illustrates the hole digging mentioned earlier in the paper, but it's also cautionary. There's a futility to this gesture of digging in Gongxing's work. And even after this effect, we're left staring at a screen. The clouds depicted in this work are reminiscent of the blandness of early Windows screensavers. And it reminds us that maybe looking is not enough. The screen suggests a relationship that could potentially be voyeuristic and bland. And this is certainly a problem in digital pedagogy. How can we work in a way that is not simply based on a passive act of looking? As photographers, we may be well placed to think critically about this relationship between looking, dialogue, and experience. And hopefully we manage to produce a project that interlinks these 3 facets, rather than relying simply on voyeuristically looking at one another. This work also highlights another problem. There's an implied hierarchy of experience. Was the student that got to fly to Bangkok given a more real experience? Online collaboration is certainly more democratic in that it is free to participate in and can be offered to a greater number of students. But is it a less genuine experience? Is it possible to create a meaningful exchange, or are online projects simply pale replicas of in real life teaching and learning experiences? So with these questions in mind, I will introduce our project and share some of the students' work and then discuss some of the findings afterwards. So Dialogues is a digital exchange program initiated in October 2020 for students with an interest in photographic practice from both Silverfield University and Manchester School of Art. Building on the success of Walls and Beyond, which I showed you earlier, we initiated the Dialogues project as a way of both continuing this relationship, but also developing it so that more students could benefit from the process of working in new contexts with an international student group. For a range of independent and supervised projects, the participating students have been working in small groups and collaborating to produce a body of photographic work that will be exhibited in both Thailand and Manchester in early 2021. Students were selected by open call at both institutions, and we were keen to include a mix of year groups to promote further dialogue within each programme, as well as between institutions. I was acutely aware that from a student's perspective, the majority of their education this year has already been delivered through a screen. And we didn't want to propose a project that would be passive or involve watching rather than doing. To counteract this, we wanted to give the students a framework that would use images as a way of facilitating a dialogue. So I'm going to run through the project with you, show some examples of work. So this very first exercise was an initial project, and it was a simple ice-breaking exercise in which students recorded a short video to introduce themselves. And this was used to help self-select groups of 4 to work with. This helped promote conversation and necessitated an attempt at understanding one another's practices from the very beginning. The second exercise was based in the surrealist parlor game Exquisite Corpse, a game in which each participant takes turns drawing on a piece of paper, folding it over to conceal their work from the next person. In our photographic version, one person from each group initiated a photographic dialogue by sending an image to a student from their counterpart university. This student would respond by making a picture and sending it to the next person in the group. This was repeated until at the end of the exchange, there would be a series of images that represent a visual dialogue that hadn't been seen in its entirety by the whole group until the end of the exercise. So these are some screenshots from tutorials showing these dialogues. The work produced is excellent, but maybe more important is the enriching and rewarding experience of both students and staff learning to navigate each other's working patterns, institutional habits and cultural sensibilities. The first exercise aims to establish a dialogue that is based on images, but that does more than look. For the next exercise, we wanted students to establish a meaningful working relationship and develop these initial dialogues into more considered work for exhibition. So I'm going to share some of the final work from each of the groups, and these came in on Tuesday, actually, so they're all quite recent. So here, Elise Fung, Hannah and Sam made a Legette style film with a narrative based on the conversations that they had. These are 4 images from Bank, Ella, In and Ollie, who gave each other the extra challenge of responding to each other's images within an hour. So each of these 4 images were made, each student had an hour, so it would be 4 hours to make this whole series of images. Here, Namwan, Panda, Amber and Ellie made work thinking about interconnections and tried visualizing the work using Art Steps, which is an online customizable virtual gallery space. And I quite like that they've used this kind of yellow cable as a way of interlinking their works. Eden, Can, Poon and Taiwai started making a series of images that responded to each other, and the short series on the bottom left indicate that. But then their dialogue opened up, and they started working with images and text and started sharing these little texts that they had made with each other in their own languages. So there's a mix of Thai, English and Chinese. As this work developed, it was rewarding to see how different working relationships developed, and the 4 different groups started to form individual identities. As the dialogue between the students became more meaningful, the work developed concurrently, becoming more nuanced and layered. And it's interesting to see that more than one of the projects relied on text to expand the traditional photographic practice, illustrating the meta-narrative of the conversation that happens to enable the production of the work. So the final stage of the project is to hold an exhibition of the work in early 2021 in both SUIC in Thailand and MMU in the UK. Again, giving students an in real life outcome that pulls away from potentially passive screen-based learning. We will work with the students to curate the shows, allowing them to think about their work away from the screen, concentrating on the spatial aspects of exhibition making. And as you saw, some of the students have been thinking about that already. So I'm keen to allow students the opportunity to give voice to their own work where possible. And I want to encourage the whole working group to do this as part of archiving the project. At the very last minute, I reached out to one of the group to see if they could reflect in a short video on their work and their work in progress. And 2 of them kindly responded. So I'm going to share those with you now, and they're about a minute each. So the first one, student Amber Parks, discusses her work and the process of collaborating with her group.
In response to dialogues, our collaborative process involves the exchange of photographs, audio recordings, and written text through group chat or FaceTime. These responses were influenced by themes we strung together by finding similarities in our thoughts and within our work. We became intrigued by connection and disconnection, the way information is shared and lost through the screen, and how our voices echo through our virtual and domestic landscapes. The cup phone represents our telephone conversations and wires connecting us. The string must have tension and balance in order to transmit sound. However, the sculpture hangs suspended and tangled, demonstrating how we may never meet and connect in person. This collage is a collection of text and image from all group members, aiming to illustrate the integrated nature and relationship between our responses. By pulling the digital work into material form, I am placing emphasis on the limitations of digital communication, such as a lack of touch and how information is lost. Text and audio were significant in our process, considering intrapersonal dialogues, speech, and sounds. The video layers sound I received from a Silpercorn student with my own response, so they play simultaneously to form a distorted ambient environment.
Great. So that was Amber Parks, and I've got a second short video from another student, Ellie Rankin, who introduces her work.
In response to
Sorry.
So the work that I've created in response to the broad theme of communication and dialogues looks into the idea of process and specifically the creative process and working collaboratively in a distanced manner and working only through the screen. The work that I've made is a series of images that I've deconstructed from some still life images. And it looks into the idea of process and how the process, the creative process, may become miscommunicated and information may be lost or gained as a result of the screen acting as a physical barrier in between our conversations.
So as you heard, both students reflect eloquently on some of the rewarding aspects of working in a collaborative project remotely, but also some of the problems. And I find the metaphor Amber draws on in her work with the string and cup telephone particularly illustrative of some of the problems, particularly with audio that can be encountered. And I'll reflect further on this in a second. So the Dialogues project has been a really useful exercise in digging where we stand, enabling a rich student experience for a wide range of students. It also provides us as pedagogues an opportunity to think further about our field. So as I've said, my work often revolves around developing a relationship between image and sound. And as such, it seems reasonable to draw on listening and seeing when reflecting on the recent shift to online teaching and learning. So I'm going to share with you two short reflections on online teaching and learning based on this.
So the work that...
Whoops, there we go. So latency. The delay inherent in digital communication, or latency, is long enough to experience when using Zoom. The temporal hiccups in information exchange that would never happen in face-to-face disrupt a natural flow in conversation. I found during tutorials I would accidentally speak over students and was apologizing a lot for not letting them finish sentences. In a series of podcasts, author and musician Dan Krakowski discusses the experience discusses the difference in experiencing analog and digital time. And I quote, "When we trade broadcast for podcast, we give up the opportunity to experience time together in the same instant," end quote. Here, Krakowski is discussing analog radio broadcast and digital podcasts. In face-to-face conversation, we're physically and temporally sharing space. We can interrupt one another, make agreement noises, and fall silent without interrupting the discussion. But due to latency, during online tutorials, each of us shares our own incompatible time space. Silences, agreements, and interruptions highlight the distance between us and make a flowing, unstructured conversation very difficult. This problem is amplified during group tutorials, with students experiencing time differently and each noise amplified by the group's open mics. We would often interrupt each other. So in the Dialogues project, we kept large group sessions to the minimum. And this allows students to self-select an asynchronous working methodology. Of course, we would have tutorials on Teams, which were useful points for bringing the group together, but most of the communication was carried out over social media channels. And this has allowed for a style of conversation to develop that is analogous to students' everyday peer-to-peer conversation. It seems that by not dictating the means of communication, students were able to utilize asynchronous means of discussion that they were already accustomed to. Using WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and so on, allowed a fluid conversation that's not replicating in real life communication, but is its own latency-free, meme and GIF-laden, image-based communication. So looking. I'm going to start with a quote here from Irmgard Emmelheinz. The Lebenswelt, literally life world, or world in common, as Hannah Arendt defines it, is the framework from which both understanding and political judgment, from the point of view of the political actor and or spectator, can arise. The world in common is where speech, thought, and action take place, thus possessing unquestionable meaningfulness and enabling common existence, end quote. So here, Irmgard Emmelheinz asks if we can share a world beyond representation, using Hannah Arendt's Lebensfeld as an example of a space which draws together a community, in which opinions can be incommensurable, but still discussed and shared. Brookfield defines discussion as disciplined and focused exploration of mutual concerns, but with no endpoint predetermined in advance. And both examples establish a shared space in which views are exchanged with a dialogic process with no fixed outcome. In regard to online teaching, the importance of trying to create a shared space that we can simultaneously occupy, a Lebensfeld could offer a way of trying to overcome the separation caused by latency. In the Dialogues project, we attempted to create a simple framework that would give the participants a shared space in which to share work and ideas, but perhaps more importantly, to have the opportunity to work in a different context. The project was a Lebensfeld created in cyberspace, not quite SUIC and not quite MMU, but somewhere in the middle. And I think this dislocation and simple framework were the key in providing an environment in which students could be free to try new working methods and work in ways which they might not usually do. Hopefully through engaging in the Dialogues project, both students and staff from SUIC and MMU have started digging where we stand, not in order to reach the other side, as we may have thought at first, but to meet somewhere in the middle, in a shared space that isn't a pale imitation of in real life experience, but a different shared space that offers different and equally rewarding teaching and learning experiences. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would like to ask for the floor at the audience. Do you have any comments? Maybe starting from Gabriel, your co-project.
I'm quite surprised about this work because it's the first time I see it. No, I'm kidding. So in your opinion, what was the most difficult part for your students in that project?
From a staff point of view, it was probably organization, and I think the students felt that it's quite hard working across different time zones with students you're not familiar with, 4 different year groups, you know, and so I think that you know, purely organizationally, that was quite hard. And then I think from a student perspective, I think maybe at first they were kind of thrown in the deep end of this type of communication, and it was a little bit like a high school disco where you had 2 groups at either end of the dance floor, and they wouldn't quite be brave enough to reach out to each other. But I think over time they kind of warmed up, and the conversation started flowing a little bit earlier.
Okay, Dino? Yes?
Hi there. I'm teaching digital video production, and I tried doing one of these collaborative projects before. And to be honest, the students just didn't get it. They didn't understand what I was trying to do. As well, using very conceptual ideas in video productions. So they watch lots of productions that have a beginner, a middle, and a nice ending. How do you deal with communicating to students what is required of them in a project like this? And how do you deal with students that are not getting what you're trying to achieve or what you're trying to go for? I mean, like, this is a very conceptual, again, is the word I want to use, kind of concept. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's motivating students not in real life is super hard, and it's possibly the hardest thing. I mean, I think for us, I think what we asked them to do was not too outlandish. So hopefully they found that the actual idea kind of achievable, and I think part of the kind of the motivation thing was they're working in quite small groups. They tended to, even though the project was around 20 students, they were working in groups of 4 mainly. And I think having this kind of small group of 4, they could bounce ideas off each other, and it's a bit of peer pressure as well, right? So if you've got 3 students who are kind of really on it, then you feel that you should catch up a little bit as well. So I think that maybe those small working groups helped with that. And I think I once had to kind of organize a group tutorial to just speak to a group because they're having some problems, but it was yeah, it was pretty minor. They kind of managed to do quite a lot on their own, to be honest. I think we certainly this was Gabriel, and I totally agree his approach of just kind of.
So keeping on the same question, I was really interested. You said one group you had to talk to. So what was going on with the group? They weren't just coming back with, I don't know, like the topic or the idea, or were they lost on the concept, or?
Yeah, no, it's mainly problems with communication, actually. And I think obviously both groups of students were at different places in their course. So I think it's coming up to the Christmas break. So there's lots of points of assessment that they each had to make. So this suddenly felt like another thing on top of what they were already doing. And I think mainly they weren't reaching out to each other enough, basically. And so the quite quick fix to that was to try to get them to work very quickly with each other to produce some work, and that seemed to kind of fix it because they just had to communicate with each other. But I'm sort of surprised that didn't happen. I'm pleased that didn't happen more. On the whole, they seem to be quite communicative.
Great, thank you for that.
No, thank you.